how these intricately woven threads lock in a beautiful creation. If only we surgeons could lock in optimal outcomes of a cataract surgery. How many times have we successfully implanted IOLs in challenging situations, only to be disappointed by tilt and decentration of the IOL, or a fierce opacification of the visual axis? Can we not lock in the perfect position of the IOL and clarity of the visual axis? Locked in. Optic capture revisited. The concept of capturing the IOL optic through the capsulorhexis is not new. It has been adopted as a means to reduce visual axis opacification in children. Some surgeons have even adopted this technique as a standard of care for adult eyes. However, due to conflicting reports regarding its effectivity, impact on inflammation, and concerns of predictable performance, it has not been exploited to its full potential. There are many difficult situations where this technique can work wonders. Therefore, we believe it is time now that we revisit optic capture, locking in the lens stability where it matters the most. With a large posterior capsule dehiscence, IOL implantation in the ciliary sulcus and optic capture through the anterior capsulorhexis is an established approach to ensure IOL stability. In cases of localized posterior capsule dehiscence, many surgeons prefer to convert it into a strong posterior capsulorhexis, so that the IOL can be implanted in the bag. But wait, here intraoperative OCT shows us the edge of the PCCC as a hanging flap. What are the chances that this IOL will remain stable? Instead, just lock it in. Capture the optic through the PCCC margin. And there, we have created a tight noose of the capsule around the IOL optic. The IOL now locked in position. Let's understand further with this capsular bag model. Here is an IOL snugly placed in the capsular bag. Look at how it moves within the bag. On the other hand, the same IOL is placed in the bag and captured through the PCCC. See the difference? Well, the indications for capture are not just limited to posterior capsule dehiscence. Have you considered optic capture even in an intact posterior capsule? Look at this traumatic cataract with a split in the anterior capsule. Since the posterior capsule is intact, traditional teaching would guide us to implant the IOL in the bag. But with the incomplete anterior capsule cover, are we sure the IOL will remain stable? Once again, lock it in. Notice that despite an intact posterior capsule, a PCCC was fashioned and posterior optic capture performed. Now the IOL is firmly locked in. The lesson learned: in cases of anterior capsule compromise, even if the posterior capsule is intact, go ahead, create a posterior rhexis and capture the IOL for superior stability. However, if there is one indication for optic capture, it is in pediatric cataracts. Locking in the proliferative lens epithelial cells, clarity where it matters most. In young children, it is a standard practice to perform a posterior capsulorhexis along with anterior vitrectomy and in-the-bag IOL implantation. The rationale is to remove the scaffold of the posterior capsule and the anterior vitreous on which the lens epithelial cells can proliferate. What if we can lock in the proliferating lens epithelial cells away from the visual axis? You are right. The answer is optic capture. A manual posterior capsulorhexis is performed, a 3-piece IOL implanted in the bag, and the optic captured through the PCCC. Fusion of the two capsules sequesters the lens epithelial cells and prevents migration towards the central visual axis. What's more, it even eliminates the need to perform anterior vitrectomy, since the role of the vitreous in the growing eye, as well as the consequences of vitrectomy, are still not clearly understood. What better if we can eliminate this step altogether? We performed a randomized clinical trial in young children with congenital cataracts. One group was subjected to the standard approach of in-the-bag IOL and anterior vitrectomy. The other to posterior optic capture and no anterior vitrectomy. This study, the first of its kind, conclusively showed that we could avoid anterior vitrectomy and yet produce similar outcomes compared to the standard approach. Now here, we may be looking at a paradigm shift in pediatric cataract management. At this point, we acknowledge other techniques based on the principle of sequestering the LECs within fused capsules. Locking in, perfecting the performance. The key element remains performing a controlled posterior capsulorhexis. And with practice, this is not difficult to master. Friends, the femtosecond laser promises to be a game changer here. We find it extremely useful, even in pediatric eyes, to produce predictable anterior and posterior capsulorhexis. What's more, this rhexis margin is extremely resilient, safely allowing optic capture. Hopefully, with wider access to this technology in the future, optic capture might just become a child's play. Keep in mind that this technique is best suited for 3-piece foldable IOLs. So friends, right from locking in the IOL in various forms of capsular dehiscence to locking in the clarity of the visual axis, optic capture is a trick worth having in every surgeon's armamentarium. Because sometimes, simply revisiting ideas with a renewed perspective holds the key to lock-in success.